The soft clatter of knives echoed through the lantern house like a quiet winter chorus. At the prime table facing Silverpine Lake, Ethan Caldwell savored it as the sound of power. In his tailored coat and polished boots, he sat like a self-appointed king, while his nervous analyst leaned in to absorb every word about Operation Grizzly, their plan to seize Montana's forests. Their waitress, Emily Hart, approached with the quiet grace of someone used to being ignored. To her, they were just another table. To Ethan, she was scenery, nothing more. Confident she would never understand, he switched to smooth-cutting French, turning their cruelty into a private joke. But Ethan Caldwell was about to learn that mountains remember forests never lie, and some secrets can split the ground beneath even the mightiest men. Winter in northern Montana had a way of swallowing sound. On nights like this, the cold rolled in from the slopes of the Bitterroot Mountains like a slow-moving tide sliding over the town of Silverpine and down toward the lake that bore its name. The sky was a pale, steel gray sharp as a blade, and tiny flecks of snow drifted without urgency, settling on rooftops, pine needles, and the wooden railings of a small lakeside restaurant called the Lantern House. The Lantern House earned its name honestly. At dusk, dozens of warm amber lanterns hung from its eaves, glowing like captured stars. Their light spilled across the deck and into the mist curling off the lake, turning the air into soft gold. Inside, the smell of cedar wood mingled with rosemary cracked pepper and the faint sweetness of the house's signature cornbread. In the middle of that cozy glow moved Emily Hart, the young woman almost no one noticed unless they needed a refill. Emily was 28 with soft chestnut brown hair, usually tied in a low twist to keep it out of her way. Her skin was fair, her build slender but strong from long shifts, carrying trays heavier than they looked. What defined her most wasn't her appearance, but the quiet gravity that clung to her like a second coat. She walked gently, purposefully, as if every step required a private negotiation with the world. There was kindness in her eyes, hazel-flecked like forest moss, but beneath it lay something else, an old unfinished storm. It was a storm born from the collapse of her former life. 2 years earlier, Emily had been a rising financial analyst in Seattle, sharp, meticulous, and idealistic enough to believe numbers could protect people. Her downfall came from a single doctored data set in a timber industry valuation, a manipulation she didn't commit but was blamed for. The scandal devoured her reputation overnight. Her firm cut her loose. Friends vanished embarrassed to be near controversy. Even her family in rural Montana, already dealing with the dying lumber economy, struggled to understand how something so technical could destroy so much. Emily fled West Landing in Silverpine, where nobody asked questions and the lake wasn't interested in her past. Now she carried plates instead of projections, water pitchers instead of investor reports. And though she rarely admitted it aloud, she liked the simplicity, but not the invisibility. Tonight that invisibility wrapped around her like a cloak as she moved between tables, the lantern light catching her profile in fleeting, delicate flashes. As the dinner rush settled, a gust of icy wind rattled the door. When it swung open, a group of 3 men entered shaking snow from their expensive coats. The host whispered a greeting, almost bowing. Emily glanced up, and the world inside her chest tightened. Leading the trio was Ethan Caldwell, a man whose reputation reached places his footsteps never had. Ethan, in his early 50s, had the look of someone engineered for boardrooms, tall, broad-shouldered, with precise silver-streaked hair that suggested both power and vanity. His eyes were a piercing blue that rarely reflected warmth. Instead, they reflected calculations. Ethan Caldwell was the CEO of Caldwell Equity Group, a private investment firm known in the industry as the Wolves in tailored suits. Ruthless in acquisition, surgical in dismantling. He walked as though the world rearranged itself to avoid colliding with him. Behind him came 2 companions. The first was Mark Duvall, late 40s, his frame wiry and restless. Mark's brown hair was thinning, and his eyes were sharp like someone who lived on caffeine and perpetual stress. He was one of Caldwell's senior consultants, brilliant with logistics, morally flexible, and known for following Ethan with the devotion of a wolf to its alpha. The second was Lance Barrett, younger, perhaps mid-30s, a research analyst whose nervous, darting gaze betrayed a man who had clawed his way up from nothing and feared slipping back. "Good evening, gentlemen," the host said, guiding them to the lakeside table, the best view in the restaurant. The lantern light touched Ethan's polished boots, then climbed the crisp lines of his charcoal coat as he settled into his seat. Emily felt her pulse quicken. She understood why they were here. Caldwell Equity Group had been circling the lumber companies of Montana like hawks, and rumors whispered through the community that something big, something dangerous was coming. Emily approached the table, her tray steady despite the tightening in her stomach. "Good evening," she said softly. "Can I start you with drinks?" Ethan didn't look up. Instead, in a smooth, cultured voice, he said to Mark in French, "Elle ne comprendra rien." "Continue." "She won't understand a thing." "Go on." Emily's breath caught. She understood every word. Because before Seattle, before the scandal, she had studied for a semester in Lyon. French had been her refuge, its cadence like water, its vowels soft as candlelight. But she kept her face neutral, her voice even. Mark leaned in and replied in clumsy utilitarian French, "L'opération Grizzly avancera vite. Les rapports d'inventaire sont presque prêts, falsifiés, mais assez crédibles pour les faire tomber. Opération Grizzly will move fast. The inventory reports are almost ready falsified, but credible enough to bring them down." Emily's heart dropped so suddenly she felt the temperature around her shift. Operation Grizzly. She knew that name, not from rumors, but from memory. It was the same kind of scheme that had destroyed her own career, falsified inventory reports, manipulated logs, doctored volumes, all designed to justify predatory buyouts. Worse, Emily's family owned a small lumber mill before the scandal broke them. Caldwell Equity Group had never been directly tied, but their tactics. The resemblance was unmistakable. The past didn't just whisper that night. It roared. Ethan finally glanced up, acknowledging Emily for the first time. "Water? And your best bourbon." His tone implied the restaurant had better impress him. "Yes, sir," Emily replied. But inside, something old and wounded twisted awake. She stepped away from the table and went to the counter where another employee, Ruth Miller, the hostess, stood polishing menus. Ruth was in her 60s, with silver hair tucked into a loose braid and round glasses perched on her nose. She had the warmth of a grandmother and the spine of a bouncer. Everyone in Silverpine respected her because she had survived the harsh Montana winters, the death of a husband, and the slow decline of the town's lumber industry, yet still greeted every customer like they were a guest in her own home. "You look pale, sweetheart," Ruth murmured. "Everything all right?" Emily offered a faint smile. "Just a long night." Ruth's eyes narrowed in that way older women have when they know someone is lying, but choose not to pry yet. "You buzz me if that one gives you trouble," she said, nodding discreetly toward Ethan Caldwell. Men who walk like they own the world usually don't. Emily managed a soft laugh, but her mind was racing fast, dangerous, electric. As the night progressed, she floated between tables like a shadow stitched from lamplight and quiet determination. Yet every time she passed Caldwell's table, she heard more French, more pieces of Operation Grizzly sliding into place like teeth on a predator's jaw. Les chiffres sont ajustés. The numbers are adjusted. Personne ne verra les écarts avant la signature. No one will notice the discrepancies before the signing. Montana ne sait pas encore qu'elle sera mangée vivante. Montana doesn't yet know it's about to be eaten alive. Emily's hands didn't shake, but her soul did. The lake outside darkened until it became a sheet of obsidian. The lanterns flickered in the wind as though reacting to something unseen, a shift, a tension, a gathering of invisible forces. Emily sensed it too. She felt as if she stood on the threshold of a door she had never intended to open again. Yet the words kept echoing through her mind. The scandal, her downfall, her family's collapse, Operation Grizzly. It was all the same machinery, just painted with new colors. And Emily Hart, the quiet waitress who tried so hard not to exist, felt something inside her stir like embers, breathing under ash. It was the beginning of heat, of anger, of clarity. By the time she set their bourbon on the table, she no longer felt invisible. She felt awake, terrifyingly awake. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the wind over Silverpine Lake had shifted. The kitchen of the Lantern House was always warm, even in the dead of a Montana winter. It was the kind of warmth that clung to the skin steam from simmering broths, heat from cast-iron pans, the hum of ovens working overtime to please tourists and locals alike. But tonight that warmth felt different to Emily Hart. It pressed against her chest like a heartbeat that wasn't her own, or perhaps one she had forgotten she still possessed. The echo of Ethan Caldwell's French words still circled inside her skull, landing like cold spears in a place she had spent years trying to seal shut. She pushed through the swinging kitchen doors with a half-empty bourbon glass on her tray and set it gently on the counter. That was when Noah Rivers looked up. Noah was 27 tall with a lean frame, the kind built from long hikes and late-night music sessions rather than any gym routine. His hair was sandy blonde, always falling slightly over his forehead as if it preferred chaos over order. His eyes were soft green, carrying a quiet sincerity that made people feel seen without being exposed. Noah had been working at the Lantern House for 3 years, recruited originally as a part-time line cook, but quickly becoming the soul of the kitchen. He approached everything food music people with a cautious tenderness. It came from his past, a childhood spent bouncing between small towns and relatives after losing his mother early. He learned very young that fragile things required patience. Tonight he noticed Emily immediately, not because she entered, but because she wasn't hiding the way she normally did. "You're shaken," he said gently, wiping his hands on his apron. "I'm fine," Emily answered, though her voice was thinner than she liked. Noah eyed her for a moment, then reached for a folded cloth resting atop a stack of bowls. It was a dark green kitchen towel, slightly worn, but warm fresh out of the dryer. He stepped toward her and draped it softly over her hands. "It's freezing out there," he murmured. And no one deserves to have their life borrowed from them, even for a moment. Emily blinked. Borrowed, lived by someone else, controlled by someone else. His gaze lowered. "I recognize the look, that's all." She held the warm cloth tightly. Noah's words landed on her heart with the gentleness of falling snow, but with the same quiet power to reshape. She wanted to thank him, but something in her throat tightened, holding the words hostage. Before she could respond, Chef Molina shouted from the far station, a reminder that life didn't pause for emotional revelations. Chef Molina, a stout man in his 50s, with shoulders like a veteran lumberjack and a voice that could slice concrete, had a surprisingly gentle personality when he wasn't yelling about timing. He was Peruvian with deep-set eyes and a salt and pepper beard, and often told stories about cooking with his grandmother in Lima. Tonight he waved a ladle like a conductor's baton. "Noah Table 12 needs their halibut, and the risotto is dying." Noah jumped back into motion, offering Emily a quick smile before turning to his station. "Hey," he added over his shoulder, "come back if you need a second." Or 100. His words lingered behind him, floating like the scent of rosemary in the air. Emily stepped out of the kitchen just as another burst of cold wind swept through the dining room. Outside, snow pressed against the windows like soft white hands. The lanterns flickered as if reacting to a shift in the air. She felt it too. The weight, the tightening, the inevitable pull toward confrontation she had tried so hard to avoid ever since her professional life crumbled. Ethan Caldwell's voice pierced the calm. He sat with one leg crossed chin, lifted confidence oozing off him like a cologne no one wanted to smell. His French rolled smoothly across the table this time, laced with something darker, more arrogant. Ils ne contrôleront jamais les chiffres. They will never control the numbers. La forêt n'appartient qu'à ceux qui savent l'utiliser. The forest belongs only to those who know how to use it. Emily froze mid-step. Forest, numbers, control. The very language that once defined her career now twisted in the hands of the man whose empire fed on ruins. She tightened her grip on her tray. Marc Duval chimed in speaking French with a faster, more excited cadence. Laisse permis. On a déjà un homme à l'intérieur du département régional. The permits. We already have a man inside the regional department. Emily felt something heavy settle inside her ribs. This wasn't just financial maneuvering. This was corruption sliding across a dinner table like dessert. Her vision blurred a moment, pulling up memories she wanted, buried her father's mill, shutting down her mother, crying in a kitchen that once smelled of pine sap and warm biscuits. Emily's own voice trying to explain a scandal she didn't commit. That same hollow pain twisted now, but this time it lit something underneath. Ethan's laugh snapped her attention back. It was sharp, cold, the kind of sound made by a man who believed the world owed him both obedience and applause. Then he looked at her. Not the way a customer looks at a server, the way a predator glances at a deer before dismissing it as unworthy of chase. He snapped his fingers. Garçon. Girl. More bourbon, he said in English without eye contact. And try not to drag your feet this time. Something inside Emily cracked. It was quiet, an invisible fissure, thin as a hairline fracture in glass. But once a fracture starts, it's only a matter of time before the whole surface breaks. Her breath trembled, though she kept her face still. Her eyes lowered not in submission, but to hide the storm rising behind them. She stepped away from the table, each movement precise, controlled. But her heart beat differently now, stronger, angrier, more awake. Back in the kitchen, Noah glanced up from his pan the second she entered. Emily didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Noah took one look at her and whispered almost reverently. Something happened. Emily pressed a hand to the counter, grounding herself. He just... Her voice cracked. He talked about illegal timber movement like it was a joke, like destroying people is a hobby. Noah's jaw tightened. People like you, people like my family. The heat from the kitchen enveloped her, but it couldn't thaw the ice forming in her chest. She straightened slowly, looking out through the kitchen window toward the lantern-lit dining room. Ethan Caldwell, Operation Grizzly, her past, her family's loss, her stolen career. It was all circling the same table. Noah reached into a drawer and handed her a fresh cloth, softer than the first. Whatever he said, don't let him make you disappear. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. Because something powerful was rising inside her, something she had spent years suppressing. A voice, a truth, a storm. She turned toward the dining room again, and the lantern closest to Ethan's table flickered once twice as though it sensed what was coming. The dining room of the lantern house had taken on a strange stillness, the kind that settles over the forest just before a storm breaks. Outside, Silverpine Lake swallowed the moonlight, leaving only faint ripples that nudged the docks. Snow drifted softly against the window panes, and the lanterns hanging from the cedar beams flickered as if sensing a shift in the air, something awakening, stretching, preparing to rise. Emily Hart stepped out of the kitchen, carrying a fresh bourbon in one hand, her breath steady, but her heart pulsing with the rhythm of distant thunder. She moved like someone who had just remembered her own spine. her own story, her own history. Her boots tapped lightly against the wooden floor, each step more grounded than the last. Ethan Caldwell didn't look up when she approached. He was laughing in French again, sharp barking, triumphant. Ces gens ne comprennent même pas la moitié de ce que nous faisons. These people don't even understand half of what we're doing. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around the glass. She placed it down with deliberate care. Ethan glanced at her then, and something cold flickered in his eyes. Disdain, superiority, the confidence of a man who had never once considered the possibility that the world might talk back. "Girl," he said, waving his hand like he was shooing away smoke, "try not to overfill it next time." Precision isn't your strong suit, clearly. The crack inside Emily, the one that had begun forming in Chapter 2, split open. A slow breath left her lips, not shaky this time, but sharp as winter air. And when she straightened, she no longer looked like a waitress gathering tips. She looked like someone forged in the colder fires of truth. Behind her, near the dim glow of the coat stand, Noah Rivers stepped quietly into the shadows. Flour dust clung to his apron like pale constellations. His green eyes fixed on her with a mixture of fear and awe, as though watching someone he thought he knew reveal a second, much more powerful self. Emily lifted her chin, feeling her heartbeat pound in her throat. She heard the whisper of her father's voice from long ago, "Mountains don't bow, Em. They rise." And so she rose. In perfect fluid French, her voice slipped through the room, clear and cold as water cascading over stone. "Monsieur Caldwell, aucun chiffre que vous truquez ne pourra jamais sauver une âme déjà pourrie jusqu'à la moelle. Mr. Caldwell, no number you manipulate will ever save a soul already rotten to its core." The silence that followed was not just the absence of sound, it was the collapse of an illusion. Mark Duval's fork clattered against his plate, his wiry frame freezing mid-breath. Lance Barrett's eyes widened so abruptly he looked almost childlike, his confidence cracking like thin ice. Even a nearby couple seated at a booth by the window paused mid-conversation. The woman Mrs. Hallie Quinn, a soft-spoken middle-aged librarian with large round glasses and a gentle curiosity, blinked twice behind her spectacles. She was the kind of woman who spent evenings knitting scarves and believed deeply in the goodness of strangers. Her husband, Thomas Quinn, a retired forest ranger with calloused hands and a beard turning the soft gray of mountain fog, leaned slightly forward, sensing danger the way wildlife senses distant predators. But nobody reacted more violently than Ethan Caldwell. His chair stopped rocking. His eyelids lifted slowly, revealing sharp blue irises, now stripped of arrogance and replaced by something much less polished hatred, mixed with shock. "You speak French," he said flatly. Emily smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a winter wolf. "I also listen." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Every syllable carried the weight of a mountain shifting. "Operation Grizzly," she continued smoothly still in French. "The falsified inventory numbers. The hidden shipments routed through abandoned forest roads near Flat Rock Ridge. The bribes to push permit approvals through the regional office. The manipulated data designed to make a stable company appear on the verge of collapse." Mark swallowed hard. Lance's hand twitched toward his drink. Ethan stared at her as if she had peeled the roof off his house. "Where did you hear?" Oh, Emily cut in softly. "I didn't hear it. I recognized it." She leaned forward just enough that Ethan had to lean back, his bravado fracturing. "I know the pattern of your work," she said. "I know the way you twist numbers, the way you bury real inventory logs under falsified ones. I know because you and men like you did it to my family's mill. And because I spent years unraveling this exact type of corruption before someone framed me for data manipulation, I never committed." Her voice wavered only once on the word family, but she swallowed the tremor like a warrior swallowing blood. At the coat stand, Noah's breath caught. He had known Emily was strong, but this was something mythic. She didn't just speak, she returned, she reclaimed. She became the storm the mountain had been holding back. Ethan regained himself enough to sneer. "Don't be ridiculous. You misunderstand completely." Emily switched to English now, allowing the entire room to witness. "What I understand," she said, "is that your plan will destroy yet another Montana lumber company. That you're planning to steal it by showing falsified low inventory, so you can push for a forced restructuring. You think no one will see it coming." Her hazel eyes met Ethan's ice blue ones unblinking. "But I see it. I see all of it." The lantern nearest their table flickered again, its light catching her hair. In that glow, Emily did not look like a server. She looked like a protector of forests, a daughter of pine and mountain wind, someone carved by nature into someone unbreakable. Mark stammered something about misunderstandings. Lance tried to laugh, but the sound died instantly. Mrs. Hallie Quinn whispered to her husband, "She sounds like a truth-teller," and Thomas Quinn nodded, once his ranger instincts sharpening. "She's the first person tonight who's spoken with a spine," he murmured. Ethan leaned forward, trying to recover his dominance, but it faltered. "You don't know what you're speaking about," he hissed. Emily tilted her head slightly. "Don't I? Because I understood every word you said when you thought I was invisible." Silence again, heavy, weighted. She stepped back, breath-steady shoulders squared. And from the shadows Noah watched with a reverence usually reserved for those who survive avalanches or lift fallen trees off trapped hikers. His eyes glowed with something like wonder. Emily Hart had finally stepped out of the ashes she'd been hiding in. She had spoken, she had risen, and everything in the room, not just the people, shifted in response. For several long seconds after Emily Hart delivered her final sentence, the lantern house remained frozen in a silence so complete it seemed to swallow even the snowfall outside. The lanterns along the rafters trembled faintly, as if reacting to the tension that pressed against the wooden beams. Ethan Caldwell stared at Emily with an expression torn between disbelief and rising fury, his blue eyes narrowing like a cornered animal's. The two men with him, Mark Duvall and Lance Barrett, looked as if someone had yanked the ground out from beneath their polished shoes. But not everyone in the restaurant was stunned by fear. At the table beside them, a man who had spent the entire evening blending into the wood-paneled background finally placed his napkin onto his plate. Until now, no one had much noticed him. He had the unremarkable calm of someone practiced in invisibility, the kind of invisibility chosen, not imposed. He was tall, around 6 feet, with a neatly trimmed beard salted with gray. His brown hair was combed back in a way that suggested he cared about his appearance but didn't worship it. His eyes, a serious shade of muted hazel, had been quietly studying everything from behind thin rectangular glasses. This was Daniel Monroe, 45 years old senior field representative of the Federal Corporate Ethics Commission, a man whose life revolved around uncovering the rot buried beneath financial empires. His suits were always modest navy or charcoal, his ties conservative, and his shoes scuffed just enough to prove he spent more time chasing leads than posing in conference rooms. Daniel had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Ohio, the son of a steel mill worker who had watched half his friends lose jobs after a corrupted corporate merger destroyed their plant. It shaped Daniel's entire worldview. Power unchecked becomes power predatory. And for the last 3 months he had been tracing exactly that kind of power Ethan Caldwell. He now stood slowly pushing back his chair with controlled precision. The room seemed to inhale as he moved. Daniel adjusted his glasses, stepped forward, and approached the table, where Emily still stood with her shoulders squared, her breath steady, her hazel eyes burning like fire beneath ice. He offered her a respectful nod, one that held both gratitude and something like awe. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice calm, low, and edged with authority. "I believe tonight we have much to discuss." Ethan's head snapped toward Daniel. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" he demanded. Daniel didn't look at him. He didn't have to. The lack of acknowledgement stung more sharply than any insult. Noah Rivers, who had stepped closer without realizing it, watched everything with his breath caught beneath his ribs. His green eyes widened, not with fear this time, but with dawning understanding that the moment unfolding was larger, much larger, than anything their quiet lakeside restaurant was built to contain. Daniel drew a leather wallet from his coat and opened it. The badge inside glinted softly beneath the lantern light. Daniel Monroe, Federal Corporate Ethics Commission. I've been tracking Caldwell Equity Group's activities for some time now. A ripple of murmurs spread through the dining room. Mrs. Hallie Quinn gripped her husband's arm. Thomas Quinn set his jaw in grim recognition. Ethan scoffed loudly, though the corner of his mouth twitched. "This is absurd. You can't come into a restaurant." And Daniel finally turned to him. "Caldwell, you have been under investigation for quarter-stealing, fraudulent inventory reporting, and multiple offshore shadow accounts linked to illegal timber trafficking." His calmness made the accusations sharper, colder, more dangerous. But until tonight we had no concrete evidence. Your careless conversation in French provided the final edges of the puzzle. Ethan turned pale, then red. "You can't use—" You'd be surprised Daniel interrupted what can and cannot be used in an ongoing investigation. Emily's pulse thudded in her ears. She couldn't tell if she felt vindicated or terrified. Daniel turned back to her with a gentler expression. "Miss Hart, I have reviewed fragments of your past case. I suspected your fall wasn't the result of incompetence. Tonight confirms more than I expected." Emily tightened her grip on her apron. "I didn't want to get dragged back into any of this." Noah stepped closer, then quietly draping her coat over her shoulders. His hands trembled slightly, whether from fear or pride was impossible to tell. Emily looked at him, and he gave her a small, fierce nod, as if to say, "You're not alone in this." Daniel's eyes softened at the gesture. "I understand," he said gently. "But what you did tonight? It may be the key to stopping Operation Grizzly before it destroys another honest company. We're missing internal data structures, pattern interpretations, and someone who understands Caldwell's manipulation method. You know that world. You understand the numbers they distort." Emily swallowed. Her throat was tight. "You want me to help you." "We need you to help us," Daniel corrected. "You would be working as a confidential consultant, not to destroy Caldwell, but to protect the forests of Montana and the people whose lives depend on them." The room around them blurred slightly as memories washed through her. Her father walking through the mill's empty lot the day after it closed the last snowfall, glittering on the machines that would never run again. Her mother folding away old papers with trembling hands. The guilt, the frustration, the grief she had swallowed whole. This wasn't revenge. This was a door. A door back to the world she once tried to protect. A door to the forests she loved, the ones that smelled of pine resin and winter air, the ones she walked through as a child, the ones she thought she would never defend again. Emily lifted her gaze, finding Daniel's hazel eyes steady and honest. "If I do this," she said, "it's not for me." Daniel nodded. "I know, it's for the forests, for the people who live off them, for everyone who lost everything because of this game." A faint, rare smile touched Daniel's lips. "Then you're exactly the person we need." Across the room, Ethan Caldwell sputtered in outrage, but for the first time in years, Emily didn't shrink. She didn't bow. She didn't retreat. She simply stood straighter. And as she nodded her agreement, the lanterns above them steadied their glow as though the mountains themselves exhaled. The next 3 weeks unfolded like chapters from a book Emily Hart never expected to live inside. Again, pages filled with late-night calls, encrypted emails, confidential interviews, and the constant hum of tension that comes from standing at the edge of something larger than oneself. Winter began loosening its grip on Silverpine, the icy fog thinning into pale ribbons that drifted across the lake at dawn. But inside the temporary investigation office, Daniel Monroe had set up in a borrowed municipal building. The cold of truth, sharp surgical, was only beginning to settle. Emily became the compass of the operation. Every morning she arrived early, coat dusted with frost hair tucked beneath a knitted beanie fingers curled around a thermos Noah insisted on making for her strong Earl Grey with honey. She spent her days untangling algorithms, auditing inventory logs, comparing digital timestamps with shipping manifests, and interpreting the subtle patterns of fraud she once studied to prevent. Her mind, dormant for so long, sparked back to life with a force that stunned even her. Working beside her was Daniel Monroe, calm as a winter river, his sleeves rolled up past his elbows, his glasses smudged from hours spent poring over files. Occasionally he would smile small, crooked smiles that carried a hint of pride. He had worked with dozens of analysts in his career, but none with Emily's combination of intuition and fire. The office also hosted a quiet visitor, Martha Reyes, a middle-aged city clerk with warm brown skin and tired eyes that hinted at long years raising 2 sons on her own. She was short and round, her thick black hair wound tightly into a bun, and her habit of bringing homemade empanadas suggested a heart too big for the bureaucratic cubicle she worked in. Martha processed paperwork for the team without asking unnecessary questions. She'd grown up around secrets and knew which ones were worth keeping. "Don't worry, Misha," she told Emily once, squeezing her shoulder gently. "The mountains don't fall for storms. They rise above them." It reminded Emily of her father, and it helped. Back at the Lantern House, life had shifted too. Rumors swirled about Emily's sudden leave of absence. Chef Molina pretended nothing had changed except for the way he left a container of warm stew labeled for Emily Eat before midnight. Ruth, the hostess with silver hair, called once a week just to say she missed Emily's quiet smile. And Noah visited whenever he could, bringing her fresh pastries or music recommendations or simply silence when she needed it. He stood by her like a pine tree in winter, patient, steady, unwavering. The investigation moved swiftly. With Emily's direction, Daniel and his team uncovered the entire architecture of Operation Grizzly, the falsified inventory logs, the shadow accounts, the forged signatures on permit requests, the illegal timber routed through unmonitored forest roads. It was all there, a web so intricate and poisonous it stole the breath from even seasoned investigators. And at its center stood Ethan Caldwell. By the end of week 3, Federal Ethics Commission officers arrived in unmarked cars. Martha cried a little when she saw them. They reminded her of men who had taken bribes from an old employer and destroyed her sister's life, but she watched proudly as they carried out their work. The fallout was thunderous. Ethan Caldwell was formally suspended from all leadership duties. His board of directors, once loyal, pivoted like frightened deer. Investors fled. News headlines erupted. Community lumber companies across Montana, previously terrified of being swallowed whole, breathed for the first time in months. Emily watched it unfold from a quiet bench outside the Silverpine Municipal Building. The lake lay behind her, still frozen in patches, but showing hints of thaw pockets of dark water peeking through like the first signs of hope after a harsh winter. She felt not triumphant, but steady, clear, whole. That afternoon, 2 envelopes arrived, one thick, one thin. The thin envelope was from the Seattle bank that had once fired her. The stationery was formal, the letterhead embossed. Inside was a carefully crafted apology, full of legal caution and corporate remorse. Attached was documentation of a settlement, an amount so large it felt surreal in her hands. Enough to rebuild the mill her father lost, enough to rewrite the next 40 years of her life. but it was the thick envelope that changed everything. It bore the seal of Silverpine Conservation Trust, a nonprofit she had admired since childhood. They fought for forest protection, small lumber business integrity, and ethical resource management, the very things her father believed in. Inside the envelope was an offer Director of Analytics, Silverpine Conservation Trust. Full autonomy, full responsibility, full faith in her ability to lead. For several minutes she simply stared at the letter, unable to breathe. Then she pressed it to her chest and let the warmth of the sun melt something frozen inside her. Later that day, as the sky turned gold and pink over Silverpine Lake, Emily walked along the frosted shoreline. Bare branches rattled in the soft wind, their shadows dancing across the surface of the water. The sun dipped lower, painting her silhouette in warm orange light. She didn't hear Noah approach at first. When she turned, he stood there, breath misting in the cold cheeks, flushed hands tucked awkwardly behind his back. He wore a rough wool coat, and a lock of blonde hair had fallen over his forehead in the way it always did when he was nervous. In his hands was a small wooden lantern carved with remarkable care. The lantern looked handcrafted, its panels decorated with tiny pine trees and lake waves. The wood was a soft golden birch, polished until it shone faintly in the dying light. Inside, a small candle flickered, casting trembling shadows through the carved openings. "It's not perfect," Noah said, his voice barely above the whisper of the wind. "But it's yours." Emily touched it gently, the smooth wood warm from his hands. "Noah, it's beautiful." He looked up, then green eyes steady. "The light isn't flawless. It flickers because the wood is uneven in places. But it still shines, maybe even more beautifully because of the cracks." He swallowed, choosing his next words carefully. "Just like your life. Like you. The pieces that broke didn't ruin you, Emily. They lit you." Her breath caught. The wind lifted strands of her chestnut hair, brushing them across her cheek like soft fingertips. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of something broken. She felt like she was standing at the beginning of something possible. The sun sank behind the mountains, painting the lake in molten gold. Emily stepped closer, gripping the lantern in both hands, its tiny flame dancing between them. That night, on the frost-kissed shore of the lake that had become her sanctuary, Emily Hart was no longer a quiet waitress hiding from her past. She was a woman who had reclaimed her name, her voice, her purpose, and perhaps even her heart. A small legend whispered among the trees of Montana. A daughter of Silverpine Lake. In the quiet rise of Emily Hart, we are reminded that grace often arrives when the world thinks we have nothing left to give. Sometimes the cracks in our lives are not signs of weakness, but secret windows where God's light can shine through. When we stand for truth, when we protect what is good, and when we choose courage over silence, we make room for small miracles to enter. Emily was not saved by force or revenge, but by integrity, resilience, and a hand of unexpected help that felt almost heaven-sent. In our everyday lives, we all carry broken pieces, disappointments, and battles no one else sees. But just like the mountains around Silverpine, we rise again when we trust that every hardship prepares us for a greater purpose. And when we walk with kindness and honesty, God walks a little closer with us. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that new beginnings are real. Leave a comment below, tell us what part spoke to your heart, and type Amen if you believe that God can turn even the hardest season into a blessing. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope, strength, and redemption. May God bless you and watch over you and your loved ones.